There's a magnetic force that exists when you stop seeking approval and start owning your own peace. It's invisible, undeniable, and irresistible. This speech will reveal how letting go of the chase and stepping into your own power is the ultimate way to draw people back into your life. Not through desperation, but through undeniable presence. Most people think that emotional detachment means you've stopped caring, that you've become cold or indifferent. But that's not what's happening. True detachment is not about shutting off your emotions. It's about creating space between what you feel and how you react. It's about separating your nervous system from someone else's inconsistency. And when you do that, you don't lose your capacity for connection. You gain clarity. There's a physiological reason why detachment is powerful. When you're emotionally entangled with someone, especially someone who is unpredictable, avoidant, or inconsistent, your system gets stuck in a loop. Cortisol goes up. Dopamine reward systems start firing not based on healthy cues, but on uncertainty. You begin chasing the next response, the next moment of connection, the next text. That's not love. That's dysregulation. And your body feels it long before your mind does. The problem is, when you're in that state, your focus collapses. You're not thinking clearly. You're not making intentional decisions. You're reacting from a place of survival. You start over, analyzing their words, their actions, their silence. And your identity slowly starts revolving around their validation. That's not just mentally exhausting. It's neurologically damaging. Because the more you reinforce that loop, the harder it becomes to exit it. Emotional detachment breaks the loop. It gives your nervous system the space to breathe again. It allows you to shift out of survival mode and back into a regulated, coherent state. From there, you can observe your emotions without being ruled by them. You can care without clinging. You can notice without obsessing. That's what clarity feels like. Not numbness, but neutrality. People often confuse care with control. They think that the more they care, the more they need to hold on, fix, or chase. But when you're regulated, you realize that care doesn't require control. Real connection doesn't need to be forced. You stop trying to decode mixed signals and start listening to what's actually happening. Not the story in your head, but the data in front of you. That shift alone can change everything. Because here's the paradox. When you truly detach, when you genuinely stop needing someone to show up a certain way to feel okay, they feel it. On a subconscious level, people sense when the energy has shifted. Your nervous system is no longer broadcasting anxiety, tension, or need. It's broadcasting calm, stability, presence. And that's what draws people in. They may not know why, but something feels different, safer, more grounded. But none of this can be faked. You can't just tell yourself, I don't care anymore, and expect your body to believe it. The nervous system doesn't respond to words. It responds to repetition, to practice, to the daily decision to pull your attention inward and anchor yourself in something deeper than someone else's validation. That's not disconnection. That's discipline. It's the practice of building a state that doesn't collapse when someone else becomes distant. You can love someone and still release the grip. You can feel deeply and still not let those feelings take over your entire system. That's not being cold. That's being in control. Because emotional detachment isn't the absence of care. It's the presence of clarity. When someone pulls away, your nervous system doesn't interpret that as a simple event. It interprets it as a threat. You don't just feel sad. You feel unsettled, distracted, unable to think clearly. That's because your brain is wired for connection. And when that connection is disrupted, especially unexpectedly, your system starts scanning for danger. It goes into hyperarousal, thoughts loop, emotions spike, and you begin obsessing, not out of weakness, but because your brain is trying to solve what it thinks is a problem related to survival. This is where people get stuck. They think their obsessive thoughts, checking social media, rereading old texts, mentally replaying every moment, are helping them understand or figure it out. But what they're actually doing is keeping their nervous system trapped in an activated state. Every time you revisit the memory, chase the meaning, or look for a signal that they might come back, you're reinforcing the message to your body that something is wrong, and that the only way to feel safe again is through them. That is the trap. Because the truth is, your system can't begin to heal until it believes the threat is gone. And as long as you're obsessively reattaching to the source of the hurt, your body stays in a loop of dysregulation. You're trying to solve the emotional pain cognitively, through logic, overanalysis, or external reassurance. But emotional safety isn't restored through answers. It's restored through regulation. The key is to shift the focus from them to your own physiology. What your system needs most in that moment isn't closure. It's safety. And that safety doesn't come from whether or not they reach back out. It comes from what you do in the moments when they don't. Breath, stillness, movement, structure. All of these aren't just self-care habits. They're reprogramming tools. They are how you tell your body over and over again, you're not in danger anymore. That's when healing starts. Not when you get the response you want from someone else, but when your system starts to believe that you can regulate without it. It's important to recognize that you're not weak for feeling pulled toward them. You're human. Your dopamine system was activated by the unpredictability. Your attachment system was invested in that connection. There's nothing irrational about that. But healing means understanding that those systems need direction. And the direction isn't backwards. It's inward. What you're retraining is the part of you that associates peace with their presence. Because until that rewiring happens, you'll keep reaching for them. Even if it's subtle, even if you say you've moved on. But once you reclaim the ability to stabilize your internal world without waiting for them to fix it, the pull begins to fade. The fog begins to lift. And that clarity creates space, not just for peace, but for perspective. And here's what happens next. When your system stabilizes, your energy changes. The frantic edge in your voice disappears. The emotional volatility that was once linked to your presence dissolves. People sense that. They feel that you're no longer needing something from them. That's when the dynamic shifts. That's when the power balance resets. And very often, that's the exact moment when they feel drawn back in. But at that point, you're not chasing. You're not waiting. You're choosing because you've already chosen to give your nervous system what they couldn't. And that's when your healing becomes undeniable. Attention is not just a concept. It's a limited biological resource. And where you place it moment to moment, day after day, shapes everything about your internal and external experience. The problem is, when someone we care about becomes distant or unavailable, we often give that person all of our attention without realizing it. We mentally orbit around them. We check our phones constantly. We analyze their actions, their silence, their patterns. And with every ounce of attention we give away, we deplete the energy available for our own regulation, our own goals, and our own identity. When you place your attention on someone who isn't placing theirs on you, your nervous system interprets that imbalance as instability. You feel off center, not just emotionally, but physiologically. Your sleep is disrupted. Your motivation drops. Your prefrontal cortex, responsible for focus and executive function, becomes less effective. That's not just emotional pain. It's a cognitive and hormonal cascade. And it feeds itself. The more you focus on them, the more dysregulated you become. And the more dysregulated you are, the more likely you are to fixate again. This loop is powerful, but it can be broken. The moment you become aware of where your attention is going and choose to redirect it, you begin the process of neural rewiring. Your brain is plastic. It will adapt to what you repeatedly do. So when you start reclaiming your attention, pulling it back from someone else and reassigning it to your breath, your body, your goals, your process, your system starts building a new rhythm. It doesn't happen in one decision. It happens in repetition. You start by catching yourself mid-scroll, mid-thought, mid-rumination, and then you redirect over and over again. That redirection trains your brain to stop treating the other person like a source of safety. And that's essential because until your system internalizes safety, until it believes that stability is something you generate, you'll keep leaking your attention toward whoever feels like they can give it back to you. You don't need to go no contact to reclaim your attention. You need to go pro-attention. That means setting structures around where your focus goes and why. It means starting the day with practices that center you. Before the notifications, before the mental spirals. It means prioritizing inputs that feed your system instead of drain it. Physical training, deep work, nature, stillness. These are not just nice habits. They're signals to your nervous system that you're back in control. And here's what happens when you consistently do this. Your baseline changes. Your body no longer feels pulled in 1,000 directions. Your thoughts slow down. Your clarity returns. And you stop waiting for someone else to reflect your value back to you. You already feel it because you're reinforcing it every day through focused behavior. From the outside, it might look like you're just not caring anymore. But that's not true. You're still capable of care. You're just not outsourcing your energy. And that shift, people feel it. They may not be able to name it, but they sense that you're no longer orbiting around them. You've become gravitational in your own right. And that's when something interesting happens. The same attention you were giving away now becomes scarce, focused, and valuable. And people are wired to move toward what feels grounded and selective, not because you're playing a game, but because your nervous system is no longer broadcasting desperation. Because the moment you reclaim your attention, you reclaim your power. There's a fundamental difference between performing detachment and actually being detached. And the nervous system can tell the difference instantly. You can post the right quote, hold back from texting, act like you've moved on. But if inside your body you're still in a state of high alert, still bracing for their next move, still hoping they'll notice you not caring, then nothing has really changed. You haven't regulated. You've just masked the chaos. This is one of the biggest traps people fall into. They try to create distance by appearing unavailable or indifferent. But what they don't realize is that their nervous system is still locked into hypervigilance. Their sleep is still fragmented. Their heart rate is still elevated when they see that name on their screen. Their thoughts still race when there's no message. And whether we admit it or not, the body tells the truth. You can't fake regulation. You can't pretend your way out of dysregulation. The system won't believe it. True detachment begins when your nervous system no longer interprets the other person's behavior as a threat to your internal safety. That shift is deep. It's not about shutting feelings down. It's about stabilizing what's underneath the feelings. And that comes through consistent, grounded regulation, not momentary emotional posturing. One of the most important principles here is interception, the brain's ability to monitor internal bodily signals. When you become aware of what's happening in your body, your breath, your heart rate, your muscle tension, you give yourself a chance to intervene. That intervention might be as simple as slowing your exhale, sitting still, grounding your feet, coming back to the moment. These practices might not seem dramatic, but they rewire your baseline. They pull you out of the reactive state where everything feels urgent, personal, and threatening. When your nervous system becomes regulated, your actions start to follow suit. You're not just withholding the text to prove a point. You genuinely don't feel the compulsion anymore. You're not avoiding the call because you're playing hard to get. You simply value your peace more than reopening a cycle that drained you. And here's the key: people feel that difference. The person on the other end might not consciously know why, but the energetic shift is undeniable. You're no longer projecting need. You're no longer seeking external regulation. You've come back to baseline. That's when everything begins to change. Because now, instead of trying to show you've moved on, you've actually moved through. You're no longer responding out of panic, longing, or ego. You're operating from grounded awareness. That doesn't mean you're immune to emotion. It means you're no longer enslaved by it. Emotional regulation is the gateway to true power in relationships. It allows you to choose your actions instead of reacting impulsively. It gives you control over your energy. And the more you practice it, the more unshakable you become. Not because you care less, but because you care in a more intelligent, measured way. You start valuing yourself not in comparison to how someone treats you, but in alignment with how you treat yourself. And that kind of energy doesn't chase. It doesn't cling. It doesn't perform. It simply holds and invites the world to meet it there. Because once you stop performing and start regulating, they don't just see the difference. They feel it. You communicate far more through your nervous system than you ever do through words. People may hear what you say, but what they feel is your energy, your emotional baseline, your presence, your patterns. And whether you realize it or not, every interaction is teaching others how to feel when they're around you. If your presence is tied to anxiety, unpredictability, or emotional volatility, it becomes their experience of you, even if your intentions are good. But if your presence is calm, steady, and coherent, it shifts everything. People begin to associate you with emotional safety. And that is magnetic. What's important to understand is that your nervous system is constantly broadcasting signals. Through your tone, your breath, your body language, even your timing. These are all telling someone what version of you they're connecting with. Are you reaching out from a grounded place or from fear? Are you being present or performing? Are you responding with intention or reacting out of habit? These micro signals shape the way others experience you, and in turn, how they respond to you. One of the most impactful shifts you can make is to stop leading with emotional chaos and start leading with nervous system coherence. That doesn't mean you suppress emotion or pretend you're fine when you're not. It means you take responsibility for the signals you send by regulating your internal state first. If you're agitated, breathless, panicked, pause. Don't send the message, don't initiate the call, don't try to resolve the discomfort externally. First, come back to center. That few seconds of regulation changes what the other person receives from you, and that alone begins to rewire the dynamic. When people sense desperation or emotional volatility, even unconsciously, they instinctively pull back. It's not rejection, it's protection. The human nervous system is drawn towards stability, not chaos. So if your presence feels like a wave of uncertainty, it creates distance, not closeness. But when your energy feels grounded, non-reactive, and intentional, others start to mirror that back. Regulation invites regulation. And suddenly, you're not in a push-pull dynamic anymore. You're in alignment. This is why it's so important not just to do the work for yourself, but to recognize how that inner work changes how you're perceived. You don't need to explain your growth. You don't need to prove your evolution. Your energy does that for you. The way you speak, the pauses you take, the boundaries you hold, the things you no longer chase. These subtle shifts speak volumes. They teach people this is what it feels like to be around someone who isn't ruled by chaos anymore. And here's the paradox. You might think people would be less interested when you stop performing or chasing. But in truth, that's when they become most curious, most drawn in. Because your calm creates contrast. It disrupts the pattern they expected. And that contrast forces them to feel themselves in a new way. You're no longer a mirror for their avoidance, inconsistency, or control. You've become a signal of what grounded connection looks like, and they have to decide how to meet that. It's not about playing hard to get, it's about being hard to unnerve. And that resilience, that emotional stability, it teaches people not just how to treat you, but how to feel around you. Because when you show up from regulation instead of reactivity, you stop chasing attention and start commanding respect. When we talk about healing, growth, and emotional independence, we often focus on what we need to stop doing, stop overthinking, stop chasing, stop reacting. But there's an equally important part of the equation that doesn't get enough attention: what you start doing with all the energy you reclaim once you stop outsourcing your regulation to someone else. Because once your nervous system begins to stabilize, there's a moment, sometimes subtle, sometimes obvious, when you realize you have space again. Mental space, emotional space, physical space, and what you choose to fill that space with will determine whether your transformation sticks or slips. What often happens is that people get to a point where they feel better, but they don't replace the old patterns with meaningful practices. So their nervous system gets quiet, but not structured. And without structure, the mind drifts. It looks for novelty, for stimulation, often for the same person or dynamic that kept them dysregulated in the first place. The key to long-term change isn't just regulation, it's direction. You have to give your brain a target, not a distraction, a target. Something meaningful enough to absorb your focus, something challenging enough to require your growth, something stable enough to reinforce your internal baseline. That could be a goal in your career, a skill you're building, a physical practice like training or endurance work, or a creative pursuit. What matters most is that it's rooted in your values, not someone else's approval. Because if you don't choose the direction of your attention, someone else will. From a biological standpoint, your brain is wired to seek problems to solve. When you remove a person who has occupied that role, someone you've been trying to figure out, decode, or please, you're left with an empty loop. The danger is trying to fill that loop with more emotional puzzles. But the opportunity is training your mind to pursue constructive challenges instead of relational chaos. This isn't about running from connection. It's about building the foundation that allows for healthy connection. Because when you're grounded in your own direction, your sense of self stops depending on how another person responds to you. Your confidence isn't performative, it's earned. You start to build evidence through consistent action that you can hold your own center. That's where real security comes from, not from detachment, but from direction. And people feel that. They sense when someone is rooted in something deeper than validation. They can tell when your attention isn't up for grabs, when your energy isn't bouncing around looking for someone to catch it. That's when people become curious, not because you're withholding anything, but because you've clearly found something: purpose, stability, peace. That kind of energy is rare, and it's deeply attractive, not in a manipulative way, but in a gravitational one. So the goal isn't just to stop caring about someone who's pulled away. The goal is to care so deeply about your own process, your own body, your own growth, that you stop needing external permission to feel okay. Because the more meaning you create internally, the less chaos you need externally. And when someone does come back, and many do, they're not coming back to the version of you that waited. They're coming back to the version of you that moved forward with purpose. Because once your energy has direction, your presence becomes undeniable. At some point, we all have to stop asking why they left, why they pulled away, why they didn't see our value, and start asking why we gave so much of ourselves to someone who wasn't grounded enough to hold it. This isn't about blame. It's about ownership. Because the moment you stop performing detachment and start living it from a regulated, centered place, everything changes. Your attention sharpens. Your energy stabilizes. Your presence becomes more than a reaction. It becomes a signal of strength, peace, and direction. People always come back when they feel that shift. Not because you chased, not because you proved a point, but because your nervous system stopped seeking them as a source of safety and became one for itself. And when that happens, you stop waiting for the past to return. You become fully immersed in the present, deeply committed to your own process, and profoundly selective about what and who you allow into your space again. And by then, the irony is you're not even waiting anymore. You've already moved on.